I want to take this opportunity to look at what the US has done to Iran, specifically in Tehran, by targeting civilian oil infrastructure, including oil storage sites, oil depots, and possibly a refinery. We're not quite 100% sure yet, but it looks as if that could also be the case. So let's take a look at this, and we will discuss it together. So you're seeing these apocalyptic sites of these fires raging after joint attacks were taking place in the capital to target this civilian infrastructure. Let's take a look at the next video together. Those are the streets on fire, and those channels actually provide water for a lot of the trees and vegetation and are part of the much larger water slash sewage system that exists in the city, which means that the oil spilled out and started to enter waterways and the sewers as well, which is an enormous environmental impact. And we cannot dismiss that. Let's take a look at the black rain in Tehran. I mean, that is quite a sight to see. That is quite a sight to see. It's very much apocalyptic if one is looking at it and not knowing what's going on. And let's take a look at how the CNN reporter on the ground reported on the situation.
This is what Tehran is waking up to this morning. The sky above the city is covered in very thick black clouds. You can see that everywhere. That's the west of the city over there, and this is the north of the city. Normally, if you look to that direction, you could actually see the Alborz Mountains, but now all of that is also covered in clouds. That comes after major airstrikes in the south and the west of the city happened last night, where oil installations were hit, oil storage facilities. Apparently also a refinery might have been hit as well. And now you can see this morning that the sky is still very dark. We saw thick black plumes of smoke in the sky yesterday. There were massive fires in the south of the city. But I want to show you something else, because it's also raining. But you can see that the rain water is actually black, also saturated, it appears, with oil. And then if we look over there, you can see that the water that's running down here also is black. So that's what's coming down this morning, this sort of oil-filled rain that we have right now on the Iranian capital after the strikes.
So we're seeing these sites in front of us, and we even have, for example, you can see here just that heavy smoke in the skies that has mixed with the clouds and produced this rainfall that has this, all these chemicals that are falling down on Iranian streets, houses, outdoor clothing that people are hanging up after doing the laundry, on pets, on trees, on vegetation, on pools, on reservoirs, you name it. Everything is covered on never mind the historic sites, the mosques, the churches, everything in the city that now is covered in this. So this is really horrific. This is really horrific. And now I want to break it down with you. I want to look at this and I want to think about it with you all. What does this mean in the context of the laws of war? Because I studied these and I want to help give you the tools to really understand, is what happened here? First of all, what happened here? How do we understand what happened here? And then, is this illegal? First and foremost, what happens when you burn fuel? So let's take a look. Let's take a look here at what happens when you burn fossil fuels. So the burning of fossil fuels, we know, releases carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide. Okay, we know that. But also, we have this part here, which I think is very important for us. Sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and carbon dioxide react with water vapor, oxygen, and other chemicals to form acid rain. Acid rain can contaminate freshwater sources, resulting in harmful algal blooms that reduce water oxygen levels and harm fish populations and other wildlife. Additionally, acid rain increases chemical weathering of rocks, including man-made structures. This is from the University of Berkeley's program about understanding global change in terms of the environment. But what's interesting here, I want to look at some of the environmental impacts and some of the health impacts. We also have here from the American Lung Association, sulfur dioxide. What is sulfur dioxide? Sulfur dioxide is a gaseous air pollutant composed of sulfur and oxygen. SO2 forms when sulfur-containing fuel, such as coal, petroleum oil, or diesel, is burned. Sulfur dioxide gas can also change chemically into sulfate particles in the atmosphere, a major part of fine particle pollution, which can blow hundreds of miles away. So this won't be contained just to Tehran. This will extend, if the weather patterns hold true, it will go into Central Asia and possibly even into China. What are the health effects of sulfur dioxide pollution? Sulfur dioxide causes a range of harmful effects on the lungs, wheezing, shortness of breath, and chest tightness, and other problems, especially during exercise or physical activity. Rapid breathing during exercise helps SO2 reach the lower respiratory tract, as does breathing through the mouth. Long-term exposure at high levels increases respiratory symptoms and reduces the ability of the lungs to function. Short exposures to peak levels of SO2 in the air can make it difficult for people with asthma to breathe when they are active outdoors. Increased risk of hospital admissions or emergency room visits, especially among children, older adults, and people with asthma. And that's just here speaking about the impact on the lungs. Never mind the other broader environmental impacts. So let's look at this article that came out, which I thought was very, very good. This is from Common Dreams, intentional chemical warfare, toxic black rain in Tehran after US-Israel bomb oil facilities. So the consequences of this environmental and humanitarian catastrophe will not be confined within Iran's borders. These strikes constitute war crimes, said a spokesperson for the Iranian Foreign Ministry. So the author, John, writes, in the wake of infernos unleashed across portions of Tehran the night before, the people of Iran's capital woke up Sunday to the hideous sight of ominous gray clouds above, choking levels of smoke, and black raindrops full of toxic oil falling across the city. Critics describe scenes of Armageddon and characterize the bombings and the destruction they triggered as the latest crimes committed by the US and Israel since they launched their unprovoked and illegal assault on the Middle East nation last week. Iranian officials urged residents to stay indoors to avoid the health impacts of the air quality following Israel's intentional bombing of several oil storage and processing facilities in the city on Saturday. On top of everything else, Israel and the US have unleashed an environmental disaster in Tehran, said Asal Rad, a fellow at the Arab Center in Washington, D.C. How many ways can they show you they have no regard for human life? And we see here X post from Trita Parsi, who's very important person in the Iranian diaspora, although he's Parsi origin. Iran's Red Crescent Society warned that the toxic rainfall in Tehran, home to approximately 10 million people, could be highly dangerous and acidic, and issued exposure guidelines for residents. Ismail Baki, a spokesperson for the Iranian Foreign Ministry, condemned the attacks and resulting damage in stark terms. The US-Israeli criminal war against the Iranian nation has entered a dangerous new phase, with deliberate strikes on Iran's energy infrastructure, said Baghai in an online statement. These attacks on fuel storage facilities amount to nothing less than intentional chemical warfare against the Iranian citizens. By targeting fuel depots, the aggressors are releasing hazardous materials and toxic substances into the air, poisoning civilians, devastating the environment, and endangering lives on a massive scale, he continued. The consequences of this environmental and humanitarian catastrophe will not be confined within Iran's borders. These strikes constitute war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide all at once. In a Sunday morning video, CNN correspondent Frederick Plitgen showed the view from central Tehran, including the Blackwater gathering on every service. Plitgen also traveled to the Shahran oil depot, among the facilities bombed Saturday, where dark gray smoke continued to billow into the air and he described the amount of damage as immense. Though it is day, the sun cannot be seen in Tehran today because of all the smoke following the U.S. and Israel bombing Tehran's oil refineries, said Trita Parsi, executive vice president for the Quincy Institute, a U.S.-based foreign policy think tank. People on the ground describe it as Armageddon. Parsi, who is of Iranian descent, also took aim at members of the Iranian diaspora, who for weeks and months have pushed for the U.S. and Israeli governments to attack their own country. History, he said, will not forgive Reza Pahlavi, Masih Alinejad, Nazanin Boniadi, and all other leaders who tricked Iranians into thinking this war would set them free. So that's a very important article to look at and to really take apart. Now, I want to look at the more interesting aspects of this all. Let's look at what this means in the broader sense of the of international humanitarian law. So let me ask the chat here: do we know of any other times where oil, I would say, refineries or oil assets were targeted in the past in a major war? Does anybody remember? Possibly, maybe the images of oil fields on fire. Anyone remember a war where that's right, in Kuwait? Very good. So the Kuwait example, the Kuwait experience was a very important part of international law development, and it remains part of. Yes, it was in the first Persian Gulf War. So it remains part of the experience and how people understood the environmental impacts. Also, it should be noted that some have claimed that Gulf War syndrome was a byproduct of that. So let's take a look at a very important paper. So this is from the, let me just make sure I have here okay, perfect. So let's go up to the top. So this is Gulf War Illness and the Health of Gulf Veterans, Scientific Findings and Recommendations from the Research Advisory Committee on Gulf War Veterans Illnesses. And this is posted on the U.S. Veterans Administration webpage, right? So va.gov. And let's go down. Let's go down here back to 75, and we'll take a look together. Okay, here we go. All right. So we have exposure to oil well fires and smoke during Gulf War deployment. There were about between 550 and 600,000 U.S. troops present in the Gulf theater. So oil fire pollutants of possible concern. The hundreds of burning oil wells presented a complex mix of potentially hazardous substances to those covered with oil or breathing the heavy black smoke. The composition of crude oil varies by region and strata, but burning crude typically produces a smoke composed of a mixture of particulates and gases that include carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, oxides of nitrogen, volatile organic compounds, ozone, various polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, acid aerosols, and soot. Extensive analysis of the Kuwaiti oil fire smoke found that the smoke contained the expected mixture of pollutants. In addition, hydrogen sulfide, a major component of natural gas, was present at varying concentrations. The most visible components of the mix were the particulate matter and carbonized particles, or soot, that formed the huge smoke plumes. The smoke contained other components, including small amounts of various heavy metals, such as nickel, vanadium, iron, aluminum, beryllium, cadmium, calcium, chromium, arsenic, silicon, zinc, and lead, all present in crude oil as impurities. Pollutants associated with combustion of crude oil have been the subject of extensive toxicological testing as part of established U.S. and international environment and occupational safety programs. For some, but not all pollutants, standards have been established that are intended to represent exposure levels that can be experienced without increased risk of identified adverse effects. When inhaled or ingested at sufficient concentrations and durations, many of these compounds have the potential to cause known health effects, primarily acute and chronic respiratory conditions and cancers. However, little occupational or animal research has been done to evaluate the potential for oil fire pollutants to cause a constellation of chronic symptoms resembling Gulf War illness. Oil fire-related compounds have been associated with some categories of chronic symptoms that affect Gulf War veterans. Particulate exposures can cause the development of chronic respiratory symptoms, and VOCs, that's the volatile organic compounds, and heavy metals have the potential to cause neurological symptoms. Carbon monoxide is highly toxic, and exposure is associated with a variety of symptoms such as fatigue, headache, confusion, nausea, and impaired vision and coordination, some of which can persist for many years. So here you have the report from the government that speaks about the pollutants that were involved with the oil fires and what they did to people and what they released, what they had. And it's not only a few chemical compounds, there are also heavy metals involved. So this kind of pollution is significant for humans, for livestock, for other animals, and for agriculture, and generally for the environment. So now you'd ask yourself, what does international law say about this? And let's go and take a look. So this is the International Committee of the Red Cross International Humanitarian Law Database. Rule 45, causing serious damage to the natural environment. The use of methods or means of warfare that are intended or may be expected to cause widespread, long-term, and severe damage to the natural environment is prohibited. Destruction of the natural environment may not be used as a weapon. And so here we are specifically looking at the various protocols that exist regarding the destruction of the environment. Now, there's a lot here, and I won't go through it all, but the basis comes down here. So, for example, we'll look here. In addition to the specific rules contained in the ENMOD Convention, significant practice exists prohibiting a deliberate attack on the environment as a method of warfare. The legislation of several states criminalizes ecocide. Estonia's penal code prohibits affecting the environment as a method of warfare. Yugoslavia condemned what it called ecocide in connection with the NATO attack on a petrochemical plant in 1999. Iraq, in a letter to the UN Secretary General in 1991, stated that it would not exploit the environment and natural resources as a weapon. Kuwait, in a letter to the UN according to the UN Secretary General in that same year, stated the environment and natural resources must not be used as a weapon of terrorism. During a debate in the 6th Committee of the UN General Assembly in 1991, Sweden, referring to the destruction of the environment by Iraqi forces, said that this was an unacceptable form of warfare in the future. In the same context, Canada stated that the environment as such should not form the object of direct attack. Also noteworthy is the declaration adopted in 1991 by the OECD ministers of the environment, condemning Iraq's burning of oil fields and discharging of oil into the Gulf as a violation of international law, and urging Iraq to cease resorting to environmental destruction as a weapon. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to take us to the Geneva Conventions, to the protocols, and to take a look at what it actually says regarding the environment. So let's go here. So first we'll go up. So this is from the protocol additional to the Geneva Conventions of 12th August 1949 and relating to the protection of victims of international armed conflicts. This is Protocol 1 of 8 June 1977. So let's go down, and where did I find it here? I believe it was Article 55. So let's go to Article 55. Let's keep going. Here we are. All right. Article 55 says, Article 55, protection of the natural environment. 1. Care shall be taken in warfare to protect the natural environment against widespread, long-term, and severe damage. This protection includes a prohibition of the use of methods or means of warfare which are intended or may be expected to cause such damage to the natural environment and thereby to prejudice the health or survival of the population. 2. Attacks against the natural environment by way of reprisals are prohibited. Prohibited. So you see it there in plain black and white. I am not making this up. This is the law. And I know many of you are saying in the chat that they don't care about the law. I know they don't care about the law, but I want you to know the law at least, so you have an understanding of what actually exists. And this is another way to hold them accountable at some point, if we can ever hold them accountable. but it's a form of accountability. So, and we haven't even I haven't even gotten to the UNESCO sites or all of the other war crimes that have been committed. I'm specifically talking about this because it was today, and it's something really, really serious. If we were to go with the girls, the school girls who were massacred by the U.S., if we were to talk about the UNESCO sites, there's a long list of war crimes now that have transpired. And the last screen I want to share is this article, which is from a law review article from the Vanderbilt Journal of Transnational Law. This is by Rex J. Zidalis, Burning the Kuwaiti Oil Fields and the Laws of War from 1991. And at the end, he talks about, so here, conclusion. The rules set forth in Protocol 1 of 1977 have yet to be acknowledged universally as part of the customary law of armed conflict. Therefore, they do not yet constitute a binding obligation on a non-party like Iraq. Nevertheless, the protocol contains provisions affecting the kinds of activity in which Saddam Hussein's forces engaged in Kuwait. For instance, Article 52 of Protocol 1 prohibits attacks on objects that do not make an advantage contribution to military action or offer a definite military advantage. Article 54, alluded to earlier, follows this by prohibiting military action against objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian population, such as drinking water installations, even though the purpose of the action is to deny the value of the object to an enemy. While a caveat exists for objects used solely to sustain combatants of the opponent or objects directly supporting an opponent's military action, a proviso exists limiting operations against these targets whenever the result would be to affect the civilian population to the extent that it would be forced to move away from the area. Finally, Article 55 leaves no doubt about the sanctity accorded the natural environment. That provision outlaws all methods or means of warfare that are intended or may be anticipated to cause widespread, enduring damage to the environment. So there you have it. There you have it. There you have it. I provided you with the legal background, with the actual protocols, additions to the Geneva Convention, and with a legal review paper that speaks about what happened, what transpired in Tehran is nothing short of a war crime. It is a violation of international law and, of course, the laws of armed conflict. And therefore, at some point, I hope that the United States can be prosecuted and Israel can be prosecuted for these crimes committed against the Iranian people. And sadly, and regrettably, and you know, I can't express my full feelings on this. It will have a long-term impact on the Iranian population in Tehran and in surrounding regions, who will suffer the consequences of this attack that really weaponized these oil depots as chemical weapons, no doubt about it.